Hello, hello. Thanks for coming.
Sure.
We're very pleased to have people in the audience, given that we're up against a panel of, scholars that, we'd all like to attend both panels ourselves. So welcome. I'm Katie Simon. I'm the interim director of the Flannery O'Connor Institute for the Humanities and associate professor of English at Georgia College and State University. I'm here with my colleague, Jessica McQuain, who is the programming coordinator and grants coordinator for the Flannery O'Connor Institute. And Charlotte Excel is going to join us virtually. She's a graduate student at Georgia College. You can see more about our bios in the program. And what we're here to do is to talk to you about coming to Milledgeville, right? And some of you have been to Milledgeville already, but both from a scholarly point of view and also just from a tourist point of view or a fan. If you're a fan of Flannery, there's much to find. But if you're a scholar, there's really, Milledgeville is ground zero for O'Connor research. And so the aim of this presentation is really to just give you an overview, how to make the trip, tips for how to do that, and also what you can find there, how you can access what's going on. We have a lot of assets that I think you'll be interested in. So when in Rome, do as you done in Milledgeville. Of course, we all know that quote by O'Connor. But what does it mean to do in Milledgeville? What do you do in Milledgeville? That's a question I asked when I moved there in 2010. And there's actually a lot of history in Milledgeville beyond O'Connor. So we're the antebellum capital of Georgia. We have a legislature building where Georgia seceded from the Union. We're 90 miles from Atlanta, 150 miles from Savannah, where the childhood home is, and Atlanta, where the manuscripts at the Emory University are. So we're sort of in the middle of those two really important sites as well. We're on the Southern Literary Trail, which is the first tri-state literary trail in the US. So you can kind of follow and go on a driving tour of stops on the trail. We'll talk about it a little later, I think, when we talk about the Writers Museum, but we're 20 minutes from Alice Walker's birthplace, Eatonton, Georgia. So it's a rich area. And if you are planning a trip, if you're thinking about coming over, we do recommend that you start with Visit Milledgeville, and they can hook you up with all kinds of really interesting sites to visit, but also where to stay, just practical things. I forgot to mention we're in our town as well, and I have a flyer. We have a lot of flyers here, so if you're interested, do come up after. But Central State Hospital is in Milledgeville, the ruins of it, I should say. It was closed down about 15 years ago, but it was at one time the largest mental institution in the United States, 12,000 patients. And it was flourishing when O'Connor lived there. In fact, she had stayed there once when she was really sick with lupus, because they had the best hospital in the area. You can go to visit Milledgeville for trolley tours that'll take you around this really incredible campus. So that's just an overview. Some of the other must-see sites we do. So Georgia College and State University, we own the Governor's Mansion, which was the antebellum Governor's Mansion. It's right next to what we're calling the Klein Florin Courthouse now, which was Regina O'Connor's childhood home. And it had been in the Klein family for years, generations. And it's right next to the Governor's Mansion. So those are two tours are available of the Governor's Mansion. We have its Smithsonian designation. It's renovated in the 1850s style. Everything fits to the 1850s. When O'Connor was growing up, when they moved back to Milledgeville, she lived in the Klein house right next to the Governor's Mansion, and you can see the Governor's Mansion from her bedroom window. So can you imagine growing up in this, house with columns, and you're next to the Governor's Mansion? We do in Milledgeville also have Memory Hill Cemetery. We'll talk more about the Klein house later because we have some new developments on that. Another thing worth visiting is the Brown Stetson Sanford House, which is, it was a place, it was moved, but it was where Regina and Flannery had lunch every day in the tea room there. And so that is available to tour that house. It's again restored. As I mentioned before, you can do a trolley tour or just drive through. We have a driving tour of Central State Hospital. And I think it's really worth looking at, and there's a lot of future work that could be done connecting that space with her work. The Oconee Riverwalk, the Georgia Writers Museum, as I said, and that has, it's a small museum. We do host a monthly book club, the Flannery O'Connor Book Club, with our own Bruce Gentry. But they have an exhibit on O'Connor. They also have an exhibit on Alice Walker, and Joel Chandler Harris, who's from the area, is also featured in that museum. We have Lockerly Arboretum, an historic home. You can tour that. It's an old plantation that's been restored for tours and beautiful gardens. And then 35 miles away, the Okmulgee Mounds, which is really exquisite. And it's the Okmulgee Creek peoples. It was a home for many years. It's now being turned into a national park in Macon, and well worth a visit. So this is just a little kind of statement from Daniel Moran, who came here recently, on why, the impact. And I think it's hard to, I'm not going to read it here, but you can read it. But I think it's hard to underestimate the impact of actually coming to Milledgeville and what it does for scholars or people who've read O'Connor. I know that when I first came in 2010 for a job interview, I had written my undergraduate thesis on O'Connor, and Bruce Gentry took me out to Andalusia Farm. And there was just this uncanny feeling I had that I've been here before. And I think a lot of people have that experience, that O'Connor was such a realist and she wrote about where she was, that I felt like I had been in that kitchen. When I saw the barn, I was like, this is Manly Pointer and Holga's barn. It's exactly how I imagined it. So to live in fiction and experience fiction and then actually be in the place. And I think that there's so much work that can be done from coming to a place and living in the space and getting the insights there and what that does to your understanding of her fiction. So as I mentioned, I'm the interim director of the Flannery O'Connor Institute for the Humanities. And this has only been an institute. It was an initiative of a former president, President Dorman, and it's been about 5 years. And we're hoping that it flourishes. And our aim is to sort of connect all the O'Connor entities on campus, right? And support. So we have the many different entities that we're talking about today, special collections. We have the farm, the historic property. We have the O'Connor Review. We have English department and scholarship. So the Institute's mission really is to be an umbrella and kind of support all those things, but also reach out. And so that's why we've renamed it to the Institute for the Humanities, to kind of use O'Connor's legacy and our kind of space as the place where O'Connor really can be studied, and use that to support programming that goes beyond O'Connor, but is, inspired by O'Connor. So we do, as I mentioned, have a monthly online book club and an in-person book club at the Georgia Writers Museum. So if you're interested in that, you can get, I think we have a circulation here. If you want to get on our newsletter, we send around, and you can sign up to attend the Zoom version of that book club. We have a newly initiated Southern Gothic lecture series. So this is one example of how we're, again, O'Connor didn't call herself Southern Gothic, but she kind of inspired that genre. So we're really interested in looking at films and art, things that are kind of in the kind of wheelhouse of O'Connor, inspired by O'Connor, or having some affinity. And we had a big part in the Flannery 100 centennial celebration that took place this last March. Lots of you were there. Again, we do that kind of public programming. And that's really what we're working on. We also have a catalog of recordings that are available on YouTube. And these have to do with, the Southern Gothic lecture series. We record it, we put it up. We've had 3 NEH institutes and the invited lectures. You can look at their lectures online through YouTube on our webpage. And again, these are great research tools. You weren't able to attend Thaddeus Davis's lecture in Milledgeville on O'Connor, but I guarantee you're going to want to dip into that if you're interested in O'Connor and race and space, right? That kind of thing. So there's 7 NEH Summer Institute lectures up there, 7 guest lectures from the last year alone that we've had like booming. Our programming has really boomed. So again, we're hoping to be, especially with the internet, even though Milledgeville is a small place far away from most of you, you can access us via the web, and that's part of our mission. So here we have a great, this is how you can access our video library, Flannery O'Connor Institute for the Humanities website. If you go to events, and we're kind of stuck with these templates from our university, so they're clunky, and that's why we're taking the time to show you. How would I find those exactly? People go in, I can't find it. Yeah, you have to, it's behind many clicks, in other words. So if you go to events, you can see all the, YouTube video links to the different scholars we've recorded. If you want to look at past book discussions, you miss the book discussion on a particular story or we did a 3-part Brad Gooch discussion, for instance. Again, you can go and look at those and watch the recordings. And we also have supported grants, and this is a really interesting thing we've had. When I came in May, we had 3 federal grants. One of them was the Writing for Success grant, which was a Department of Education grant. Jess McQueen was the project director for that. And that was to develop curriculum for middle grades about using O'Connor, right? And some of that has become a template. It's being used in Italy. It's also being used in Baldwin County. We also hosted podcast workshops and sort of encouraged students in storytelling in different mediums, which was really successful. Brought school kids to Andalusia and hosted a symposium, which included children's book authors and illustrators talking about adapting O'Connor's work. So that's one example of one of the grants we've written. The NEH Summer Institutes that started with Bruce Gentry, he's done 3, and then the O'Connor Institute kind of did the 3rd one and pressed upon him to be part of it. These are such great, I have to stop here for a minute and just say publicly, I hope the NEH is a thing, I don't know if it will be, but this has been a great, if you're familiar with an NEH Summer Institute, it's like summer camp for scholars, right? So the last one, 23 scholars attended, right? Came to Milledgeville, stayed in the dorms, had classes, went into the archives, had great guest speakers, and had that kind of, again, a great experience of just getting immersed in what is in Milledgeville, what is available for scholars, right? So we had our conference in the 24 coming out of the 23 Institute, looking forward, looking back, a 4-day conference with 90 scholarly creative presentations. Again, that's one of the things we do is host scholarly conferences. And, I guess we've had several NEH grants, and we'll talk a little bit about the NEH Oral History grant that we've been working on. That sadly was terminated, right? So it was a 3-year grant. We got 2 years, but it seems like they terminated all NEH grants from what I can understand. But one of our missions is to write grants. So we're going to be actively looking for private donors in the future, right? So if anybody, again, has any ideas, please, take our flyers, get our contact, let us know, because we really want to endow this institute. That's my little
My name is Charlotte Excel, and I am.
So Sorry. So
Ghost of
no warning
Charlotte.
on that. I thought I was gonna have to click on an arrow to get her to speak. So Charlotte Excel is a grad student and who couldn't be here because the NEH terminated grant was gonna fund her summer job, but we were happily able to record her and put her on this. So she's gonna talk to you about the NEH Collecting the Past grant that she's been a big part of.
My name is Charlotte Excel, and I am a graduate student at Georgia College and State University. And today I'm going to be talking about our Collecting the Past oral history grant at the Flannery O'Connor Institute for the Humanities. I'm going to go ahead and read our mission statement. Collecting the Past is a 3-year oral history grant funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities. The focus of the grant is to learn more about local experiences with class, gender, race, disability, etc., during but not limited to the heart of O'Connor's writing career. Our main goal is to expand the existing historical narrative of Milledgeville by documenting unwritten life stories of community members and creating an archive that is free for public access. As of right now, we have 18 interviews available via Knowledge Box with more in production. You can follow the collection to be notified when new interviews post at the link below. In addition to what is currently available, we also have a lot of interviews in production. So in total, we have 33 interviews with more being uploaded. The first batch of interviews is from a local history class that was offered at the Georgia College History Department. This class was offered by Dr. Stephanie Opperman, and it matched narrators from the Milledgeville community up with her students. These interviews are more long form, and they usually focused on a narrator's life story as it related to Milledgeville or Flannery O'Connor or whatever the relevant subject was. Then there were several more interviews conducted by myself and another student assistant named Julianne Makowitz. These interviews were also kind of the life story format, and they were with narrators that students couldn't get in touch with or excess narrators where there weren't enough students for each narrator. And there were also narrators that were researched by myself and Julianne. And those were conducted mainly in summer 2024, but they also started in the spring before that and went into the fall after that. Then there were several more short-form interviews from students in a second round of the local history class, and these interviews focused on Milledgeville locations, including historic grocery stores and Flannery O'Connor's church, Sacred Heart. I want to talk about several of the topics discussed in the oral history interviews, so y'all can get a snippet of what's available in this newly archived history. So one main topic, of course, was Flannery O'Connor. That was one of the goals of the grant, and certainly that goal was fulfilled. One main subject was Flannery's daily activities as it relates to the Milledgeville community. Scholars know this, but a lot of people kind of do picture Flannery as a recluse, and it was really cool to see community members talk about Flannery and the way they remember her. Obviously, we talked to a lot of people about her church and the Catholic community in Milledgeville in general, but we also talked about businesses that Flannery might have frequented. One of our narrators was a former waitress at a restaurant that Flannery loved downtown, the Sanford House. I have learned about what Flannery wore on different occasions, little arguments she got into with her mother about what she wore, what she ate, her interactions with Georgia College students. I was pleased to learn that she often interacted with Georgia College students and in a way that was really, really polite and generous. She gave books to Georgia College students, invited organizations at the college to come to Andalusia for events. She wrote recommendations for Georgia College students to get into other institutions. So she really was pretty involved in the Milledgeville community, even if it seems like she satirized it a lot, which she did. I've gotten information from narrators about almost every main topic in Flannery's life, down to what color car the O'Connors always bought. Another really, really wonderful fruit of the oral history grant has been getting to see Flannery in those different contexts. A lot of times I would sit down for an interview that I thought was going to be all about Flannery O'Connor, and we would mention her only once. And the other half of the time I would sit down to an interview that I didn't think was going to be about Flannery at all. And it ended up that the person knew her pretty personally. So lots of diversity in the situations that we get to see O'Connor in. One of my favorite interviews was with the son of a local civil rights leader, Oscar Davis Jr., and he talked about how when he was little, Flannery would let him ride the ponies at Andalusia. She would give him lemonade and cookies, and he has really fond memories of her going to Andalusia, playing with the animals, while his grandfather and Flannery talked on the porch. So it's not every day that you get to talk to somebody who knew Flannery O'Connor and Martin Luther King Jr. So that was a really, really special interview. I've gotten to talk to somebody who was a butcher, whose family was a butcher at Central State Hospital. We learned through that the O'Connors sold livestock to Central State Hospital. So I've seen Flannery in a lot of different lights because of this grant, and that's been a really enlightening experience. Another central topic of the oral history grant was racial tensions in 50s Milledgeville. We made sure not to shy away from these discussions. So we learned a lot about police violence, other forms of racial violence, the KKK, as well as a really, really rich civil rights and African-American cultural history that had heavy roots, had extensive roots in Milledgeville during that time. Another main topic was Georgia College's history. Georgia College went through a lot of iterations just within the interviews. Georgia State College for Women, Women's College of Georgia. So that was really interesting as a Georgia College student to kind of see the different iterations of Georgia College. Obviously, another central topic was Central State Hospital. I think a key takeaway about Central State from the oral history grant has been sort of the employee economic perspective. A lot of people have done great work about patient experiences at Central State Hospital, which tended to be pretty dark. And certainly this history that I've gotten to know through the oral history grant doesn't discount that other history. But Central State Hospital really was a strong economic institution in Milledgeville, and a lot of the narrators expressed hardship during the time that Central State Hospital was declining and eventually closed. And a lot of narrators talked about how Central State Hospital really contributed to a Milledgeville middle class, particularly a Black middle class. So that's also a very interesting history. Because of the connection to Flannery, I did talk with a lot of narrators about Catholicism in the South and some anti-Catholic rhetoric that was rampant in Milledgeville at the time. Interestingly enough, it doesn't seem like the O'Connors or Kleins had an issue with anti-Catholic sentiment, but other community members did express having experienced it. We also talked about other marginalized groups in Milledgeville, including women, queer people, and other religious minorities. And of course, we also talked about Flannery's legacy for both scholars and creatives. So we talked to a few people who had researched Flannery O'Connor and who had an experience in Milledgeville doing that. I wanted to spend some time talking about takeaways for O'Connor scholarship from the oral history grant. I think the central significance of the oral history grant in terms of Flannery O'Connor scholarship is going to take the form of new contextual ways of interpreting O'Connor's fiction. So new historicism, imaginative histories. I think the Milledgeville that Flannery O'Connor presents in her stories, it can contain multitudes upon a very close reading, but there are ways in which it seems a little bit monolithic, or at least monocultural, and Milledgeville at that time really wasn't like that. And I think that scholarship will do well to remember that Flannery was operating in a very sort of diverse town with a lot of interesting dynamics, historical tensions, religious tension, racial tension. And so I think that recontextualizing Flannery's stories from that perspective will shed new light onto Flannery O'Connor's scholarship. I think listening to the oral history interviews and all the stories they contain can help take apart and put back together our understandings of Flannery's Milledgeville, of her stories, and her biography as well. That said, I don't want it to seem like my predictions are the limit for what can be done with the stories that we've recorded. I've already seen research conducted in a few of our oral history interviews be used for publication, as well as in a conference presentation. And some of that information that I've seen used in scholarship just in the few months that things have been posted, things being the oral history interviews, just in the past few months that they've been posted, I've seen information used that wasn't information that I personally flagged, and it was used in a really, really wonderful way. So I think the sky's the limit. Y'all know any little detail can be the key to somebody's research. So I personally am really excited to see what scholars come up with, having heard the interviews in the oral history grant. We didn't just interview friends and acquaintances of Flannery, but also Milledgeville community members and some scholars and researchers. I also think that will be valuable. It's always valuable to record what other people think about a certain genre of scholarship. Maybe one of their ideas sparks somebody else's ideas. Also, people who study Flannery O'Connor at length often have information about her friends as well. One of our interviews that's in production has a lot of really great information about Mariette Lee as well. And so on my closing note, I kind of want to talk about Milledgeville as a literary heritage site and how the oral history grant supports that. I talked to one narrator, Mary Carpenter, and if any of you were at the September conference in Milledgeville, I touched on this a little bit. But in her interview, she said, I think all that, meaning everything in Milledgeville, archives, Andalusia, the people, Flannery's grave, etc., all that makes you feel like it's not as if you're living in her world, but you can experience it pretty intensely. And she means Flannery O'Connor's world. I think that that's very true. As somebody who wanted to study Flannery O'Connor for a long time, even before I moved to Milledgeville, I also found that to be true. So one of my key takeaways from the grant is that any deeper understanding of Milledgeville, even if Flannery O'Connor isn't mentioned in the interview, has the potential to reveal something about Flannery because it further intensifies that feeling of having shared something with her.
So again, that's Charlotte Excel, who's actually conducted a number of these oral history grants. That's something that contextualizes O'Connor's work by really reaching out to the community and people who are still living who knew O'Connor or knew her world, right? And you can access those via the internet through our knowledge box here. We have them all archived. They'll all be archived eventually. Most of them are already. And then I would recommend, if you're coming to Milledgeville, read some of those or listen to those ahead of time, and then you can go to the sites they're talking about. I know that, again, this is going to open up scholarship in interesting ways. For one thing, I know there's one interview of a gentleman who lived across the street from O'Connor, was a neighbor of hers, and used to go sit with her every, couple days on the porch. And he said they were really good friends, and he was Black and she's white, and he just felt really welcome. He talked about, the KKK burning across the street, and, this is all happening at the same time. So I think that there's just lots of potential information that contextualizing O'Connor will help us understand her world and her work. So another thing that the O'Connor Institute has done, we've offered them twice now, is the Laidlaw Fellowship, which is a fellowship for junior scholars. So if you're a junior scholar, we'll pay you to come to Milledgeville and work in the archives. And this is with this generous support of Mike and Wendy Laidlaw. So this would pay for your lodging, your travel, hopefully most of it. Again, Jess will talk more about the what's in the archives and why you'd want to go visit them. But again, you can go to our website to find the application online. We have a number of handouts here, so you can take those away. But if you are a junior scholar or you have students that are junior scholars, please, this is a great opportunity. So please have people apply. Past fellows, we have one of them here, Alex Taylor. He was last year, and he came and worked on finishing up his dissertation and used the archives for Unreal Cities, the political vision of Evelyn Waugh and Flannery O'Connor. And just this May, we had Jack Love come to town. I was already out of town, but his work, he's a graduate student at Texas A&M, and he's working on legacies and anxieties of the Atlantic world in the farm fiction of Flannery O'Connor. So again, we want all scholars to come, but we particularly have a special fellowship for junior scholars. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jess, who's going to talk about special collections where the manuscripts are held.
All right, so special collections is the university archive as well as the repository for Milledgeville and its surrounding counties. So they do try to collect on the surrounding areas as well. So you can find records of things that may be relevant to O'Connor research through kind of tangential relationships. So to give you some background on these archives being established at Georgia College, pretty quickly after O'Connor graduated from what was then Georgia State College for Women and began her literary career, the librarians were collecting newspaper clippings, magazines with her publications, and then published works, and then some early items from her time at the Peabody High School, which is on campus. It's an incubator school for teachers in training, and then her time at undergrad at Georgia State College for Women. And in 1970, her mother, Regina Klein O'Connor, donated the first manuscripts, more than 7,000 pages worth, to the archives. That included early drafts of Wise Blood, portions of The Violent Bared Away, and most of the short story manuscripts. So in 1989, an actual guide to the manuscripts of Flannery O'Connor at Georgia College was published, and it remains the primary guide of materials available. So if you hear people refer to the Red Book, that's the book that they're talking about. Definitely recommend taking a look at that before you take your pilgrimage to the archives. One of my favorite parts, having worked in the archives, was O'Connor's library and being able to look at her notes, her underlines, all of the marginalia that she has in her collection. And it made me chuckle when someone said she didn't like Virginia Woolf because Virginia Woolf is one of the books that's most visible here in my photo. But this is not even all the books. This is just a kind of snippet. So tons of books, and then many books that are like translations of O'Connor's work and criticism about O'Connor's work. So here are some of the topics that folks have worked on after doing research in special collections. This is kind of a new, I think Anne is presenting on this at this conference about the impact of Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, who was born Edith Stein, on O'Connor's theology. Colin Cutler was at the 2023 Summer Institute and looked at the manuscripts, and that informed his album Tar Water. And there was a book, Sign Language, reading Flannery O'Connor's graphic narrative, that was also came out of research in special collections. And Patricia West is now currently researching farm workers' lives and using a lot of the oral history collections, whether the new ones from the NEH grant or some of the ones that are on site that have just been done in the years that the archives have been collecting. So you can find unpublished letters, audiovisual materials like photographs, as well as recordings of talks and lectures that O'Connor gave, galley proof. There you can access the interview that she did on television with the guy who was chain smoking, and she famously said she would not like to summarize, her work. Of course, the manuscripts are there, also theses, dissertations, and materials published, and then first editions and translations. And currently in the Rare Book Room, there is an exhibit up on pulp fiction and looking at cover design. And so there are a few O'Connor books featured prominently in that display. So to do your research, I also want to encourage, if you can't make it to Milledgeville, don't lose hope. They're currently working on some agreements with the trust to do interlibrary loans of manuscripts and materials. But your first step, maybe after consulting the Red Book, is to go to the library's website and click on Meet with Us. And this will be, you can do this virtually via Zoom or telephone, and you'll want to make an appointment with Holly Croft. So Special Collections is where you'll want to make the appointment. And you can select your date and time, and it's typically 30 minutes. They can help you narrow down what you're searching for or refer you to external sources or come up with dates that would be good for you to come and do research. So you will need to have some information briefly describing what you're looking for, if there's any special requirements or specific collections or materials that you want to see. So since the O'Connor archive there is pretty vast, it does help to have a little bit more specific focus, even if you can't say exactly the folder number. So there are finding aids that are available to help you see what is there. And you can give yourself an idea of what you'd like to request so that you can include that in your appointment. And if anybody wants these slides, at the end, you can write down your info and we can email you a PDF with all these links and email addresses and everything. Just be warned that researchers in O'Connor's archive do have some special paperwork to figure out. There's a registration form where you'll indicate your institutional affiliation, your status, the purpose of your research, your publication plans, and then you will agree to the rules of using the manuscripts, and then, of course, copyright law. So if you'd like to do research at Andalusia Farm, it does operate in a museum capacity. So a lot of the artifacts are very much things, not paper, but that can be very valuable to some people. So you can always do, of course, the public tour. Those are offered 6 days a week. And research will typically take place Tuesday through Friday. And that's just a direct outreach to the curator with your dates and your topics. But you can also just go wander about the grounds. You can look at the peacocks. There's a nature trail through the woods, which is really a great kind of immersive experience to O'Connor's settings. So some other sites, the Sanford House, which there's a kind of sketch postcard of it here. It can actually be reserved for private events now. You can visit Sacred Heart Catholic Church. The Klein-Florin Courthouse is not open for visitation currently, but you can always drive or walk by and just take a view. One of my favorite things I learned in the Brad Gooch biography was that the brickwork is actually a really unique style called like lace brickwork. And it was done by enslaved people who were really adept at this craft. And it has survived, you know, these 200 so years to still be this really beautiful fence work. And then Memory Hill Cemetery, which has, thinking about the death panel this morning, there is this kind of ritual of folks leaving little mementos, coins, rosaries, feathers. My favorite thing I ever saw there was a Barbie leg. So that's a little, just a leg of a Barbie. So a little Joy Holga shout out there. There are often seashells, flowers, handwritten letters. I think aspiring writers, you know, kind of go and pay their respects and ask for the blessing of their idol. So if you want to do the full Flannery O'Connor pilgrimage, which I highly recommend, you may find it most logical to fly into Atlanta and then take a drive on down to Milledgeville after you visit the Rose Library and see a lot of the juvenilia materials as well as other materials that are there. Get some boiled peanuts on the way down and stop to Milledgeville to see Andalusia, special collections, whatever kind of activities and programs we have going on. And then hop back in the car and go to Savannah to see O'Connor's childhood home. And there's plenty of places to stop for peaches on the way, so make sure you do that as well. And get a little Georgia's famous shrimp, which we actually have a specific grass that grows off the coast of Georgia that the shrimp eat, and it makes the flavor and texture very good. So you can fly out of Savannah Airport with Delta back to Atlanta and just hop on your connecting flight and not have to drive back across the state. So we do encourage folks to visit all the O'Connor sites. We definitely find it's very fruitful to collaborate with them. You know, we've been able to use some of the photographs and materials at Emory to inform our projects, especially the upcoming restoration and renovation of the Klein-Florin Courthouse, which Emory has some great photos of. I'll turn it back over to Katie to close us out.
So the Klein-Florin Courthouse is really the newest acquisition. When Louise Florincourt passed away in 24, Georgia College and State University received this property, and it's currently going to, well, it's going to be renovated and it will be a mixed use space for events and also the home of the Flannery O'Connor Institute for the Humanities. What's really unique about this property, I think it's hard. I've been in it 3 times. Bruce has been in it. Jess has been in it. It's hard to imagine. Louise Florencourt was living here, but she was living just in a little modernized unit in the back. It's a giant mansion full of stuff, and it's full of O'Connor's stuff and her family's stuff. And it's like really a time capsule. And so currently the university, it's like receiving a gift, but now we have to deal with this gift. And so deciding like what's valuable. I mean, to me, everything's valuable, but to some people, none of it is, right? So O'Connor's room, to give you an example, is like how she lived in it. It has her bed, her sheets, her blankets, her pillows, her talcum powder, her desk, her radio. It's weird, right?
Suitcase.
What else?
Her suitcase.
Her suitcase with her signature on it. Yeah. Her radio. This is, let's see. Yeah, there's the radio. So important to me, my work, because, oh, she didn't like music, but why did she have a radio on her desk? I think she listened to a little music, right? So there's, again, endless possibilities for scholarship here. I've just toured it a few times and every time I geek out because there's things like Regina O'Connor's funeral guest book and tantalizing list of names. Sheriff Massey was a pallbearer. Wow, why? You know, I want to know.
Sheriff Massey.
Yeah, but how did he?
Everything.
How did he know her? What is? We didn't think to interview him in our oral history. Who would have thunk, right? But now I'm like, I want to interview him. What do you know about the Klein, O'Connor, Florencourt family? I'm sure he has a lot of stories to tell. So there's these giant. The entire house is in. It's never been modernized. Okay, so it's not climate controlled. You can see here. There's most of the house is like this, full of stuff and also just not modernized. So it's a giant project. This is, again, an archival photo from Emory of what it looked like, probably in the 70s. And then that same room today, what it looks like. Again, really interesting stuff in here. For instance, Louise Florencourt's library of books, which are heavily annotated, marginalia, rebuttals to scholars in there. I think it's just going to be quite interesting for people. So we're hoping to have, I guess what we're having, this is like laid out. I think Louise laid this out on the desk. Some of it's curated, right? And some of it's just junk, piles of junk. So this is the house where they found the barrel of artwork of O'Connor's that we just had the opening, the art opening. It was in the attic, for instance, right? There's just, so if that's there, there's also this book, children's book, with her name signed in front. So again, there's piles of stuff. Somebody has to go through it. And so Georgia College is currently, working on, I say loosely, thinking about working on assessing it, right? Having somebody come in and I guess this is the difficulty is, itemizing, get an itemized list of what's even in there so we can figure out what to do with it. Some of it clearly should go to like special collections or to a museum, and some of it maybe not. Some of it, again, we're hoping to hire scholars to come and help us research and kind of determine what the value of these items might be, right? And where they should go. So these are some of the upcoming projects, as well as digitizing the Andalusia photo collections. Again, Louise Florencourt donated a lot of things. She left the house and everything in it, but before she did donate things she deemed more important, and they are currently at Andalusia, including a number of photographs, things like O'Connor's pajamas. Again, that reminded me to burn all my pajamas before I die so they don't have curators talking to you about them and what they mean,
Oh, no.
again, it's like who decides what's important, right? And that's the big problem with the house. It's chock full of stuff, and some of it clearly is important. But not everyone's an O'Connor fangirl like I am. So to me, the whole place is important. And so we have an architect who's studied it to do a $5 million renovation, but first we have to clean it out. Some of the other upcoming projects, interlibrary loans, as Jess mentioned, for O'Connor research materials, that would be a great help to people who can't travel to Milledgeville. And so, again, I think, and this photo is showing Louise Florencourt's books laid out on her bed, right? And it's just, I was walking through here with the New York Times reporter, and he said, Brad Gooch's biography isn't in here. That's weird. And then a little while later, he goes, I found it. It was like off on the side, and he's like looking through. He goes, I think you're going to want to see this. But again, we're being toured through here, quick, no time. So hoping scholars can really get in and spend some time really seeing what's important there. And that'll be our next big project. That'll take us years, I'm sure. Again, we have this flyer. We have all our contact info, the special collections. If you have ideas about funding something like this giant project, let us know. We're really interested. Also in here, we kind of haven't mentioned too much the Flannery O'Connor Review, because we know that Bruce Gentry is going to be giving his keynote and talking quite a bit about it. But that's, again, one of the assets of Georgia College, and we have in our flyer, if you want to submit to the O'Connor Review, we have all the information for that. And it really is the place to go for O'Connor scholarship, nationally, internationally. So here's some of our information, and we have plenty of time for questions. And again, we have lots of pamphlets and information if you want to come up here after, but we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Is Frances, her cousin, involved, and do you ever interview her? I mean, I know she's 89 and she's getting married, so I mean, she's busy, but is she involved at all?
She's one of the oral
We just published her interview. It was fairly long. It was over an hour, but she did an interview with Charlotte, and that is available on YouTube and Spotify and the Knowledge Box. And it was a really lovely interview.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah, she was great. And she was there for the birthday and the art opening. Yes, and she came with her bow. So it was really great to meet her in person.
Amazing in Spain. I mean, amazing. I learned more about Flannery in Spain through Frances than. She was in our hotel. She befriended myself and my daughter. We walked to all the events together. I mean, it was just so personal.
Yeah.
So she was amazing. And then the other one on the personal interviews on, so I'm a counselor / spiritual director. And so we were trying to find out, listening to some interviews of people that went to daily mass with Flannery and her mom. So are they available? They were gonna interview some people because she went to daily mass, I guess, every day or when she could.
There are some of those, some of them, as we mentioned, our grant was cut, so that means our personnel who were making the interviews available are no longer there. So it's a little bit more slow moving, but we're hoping over the summer to make some progress. One of the newest ones we just made available was an interview with a man named Al Matichek. And he's the son of the displaced person who came to Andalusia. And they met through their shared religion. And so the family, he shares about how the family ended up going to Sacred Heart, how they met Regina, and his recollections of growing up, and his family working on the farm. And he still lives in Milledgeville today with his family. So that one I thought was, I wish that one was longer. That was one that I thought, I wish this one was 2 hours long. But there are some with a fellow churchgoers.
Parishioners, okay.
Parishioners.
Parishioners, because that was one of the questions that came up about finding out, there's still people alive who went to daily mass, or that maybe relatives of the ushers and different things, so they were trying to So if you were interested in that, go to one of your websites, just type that in or something.
Yes, and if you want to share your information, your email, then I can send out kind of a summary with our slides and with direct links to
Thank
the
you.
interviews and everything.
It goes by really quickly.
Okay, thank you.
I kept thinking we were running short on time. I don't know why.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
What has been the most exciting or surprising find out of the Florida courthouse so far? I know you talked about the radio, but what is the thing that you think scholars are probably going to benefit the most from now that that has been opened?
Well, I mean, we don't even know what all's in there. Like,
Yeah.
there's piles of trash.
Mhm.
And we'll see what, I mean, I saw in the attic Catholic pamphlets about political talking points in the 50s. That blew my mind, but that's just like in a rat's nest with other stuff.
Gotcha.
I think the art so far has been the most important thing. I
Okay.
mean, I think the revelation that O'Connor painted until her death. Right. We knew she was a cartoonist. We knew she was a visual artist early on, but I don't, and I think that the family, what I understand is the family was sort of keeping the art because they didn't want to compete with her reputation as a writer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that art has been a giant revelation, but I think there's going to be a number of revelations. That's the most obvious one. And whoever acquired the house got that first. I think, Florencourt's books, I think, are going to be quite interesting.
Has anybody gone through Louise Florencourt's files in her office? Do we even know if that stuff's still there?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many potential projects there. That's why we want to bring scholars and do like a 2-week stint, and maybe it's overwhelming. So it'd be like, stay in this room. Stay on this desk, stay over here, because there's just, but I think scholars, this stuff is important to scholars in a way that it's not important to, college presidents, let's say, right, who are really in charge of the place. So I think having the meeting of the minds before, my fear is they'll just go through and they're like, we need to renovate this place and take it all out and throw it in the dumpster. So yeah, that's important. The radios, I think, are quite important. She had a radio on her desk. I think it's hard to say she did, and radios back then, the radio waves were different. She could listen to Atlanta stations. So as a middle schooler and a high schooler, she was living in a room that had her big radio on the desk. I don't know what she was listening to, Amos and Andy, whatever, but stuff. So she's much more in the world than we might think.
Yeah, I missed it, but what is the goal of the renovation? Like, to serve as kind of an academic build? Like, yeah, I guess I feel like there's a lot of different outcomes potentially.
Well, because of the historic status of the house and then like ADA compliance, it's tricky we can't just put an elevator in the middle of it. So we're hoping for a mixed use space where there's room for offices, like for us to my office is in a completely separate building than Katie's office. So collaborating is, kind of a scattershot. But having offices and having like conference space, meeting space, hosting space to host, receptions. And there's been all kinds of talk, but we don't have any kind of official plans yet. But it would be really great to have some parts of it kind of preserved and interpreted as, this was her bedroom in the 40s and it's, set up as such. But we can only share our ideas right now.
I wasn't
We
sure.
have a lot of ideas.
Yeah.
We're not running the show there, so, but I keep floating them up. And I was just on a trip before this in Munich, and I went to a number of house museums. And so I got a lot of ideas that I'm gonna bring back, because I think there's so many rooms in this. It's like a 12-room mansion. There could definitely be gallery space. There could be the curated rooms that were interpretations of how she lived there. And we could still have plenty of event space in the parlors and dining room downstairs. So I think it's pretty open right now. I think the main thing is they don't want it to be competing with Andalusia Farm, which we currently operate as a house museum, and that's public facing. So this is going to be more of a mixed use space for sure.
Thank you.
And John, I wanted to I just thought of your question about what's the really big valuable things. I'm really interested in some of the archaeological exploration that they may do, because we know O'Connor had duck ponds in the back. And so just walking around as a gardener myself, I was like, oh, look at these plants that are here. Look at these camellias. But it looked like behind one of the trees, there was kind of an indent and a little bit of a brick outline of what may have been a duck pond. And so the material cultures people might also find a lot to be interested in about the clothes that were left in the house. There's a lot of early mid 20th century clothing that is interesting to me. But it's kind of like one of those like Easter eggs where you pop it open and there's a toy inside. It's like we still haven't even gotten to the bottom of what all's there.
Regina's room got a lot of her stuff in it. For instance, that she died there. But it's like 1950s dresses in 1950s dry cleaning bags just hanging there. So it's almost like a time capsule.
Yeah.
So people interested in clothing of the era, but the Klein family actually built that house before. The governor's mansion was built in 1830. When the governor came to town, his house wasn't ready. He stayed with the Klein family. So it goes back that far, right? So there's stuff from that, books from the 18th century in there that would be beyond O'Connor, but they were in her family. There's 3 pianos, 2 Steinways. Again, this idea that she didn't listen to music. Music was all around. One of the Borders was giving piano lessons there. So it's hard to say, I mean, that's why we really we're really pushing for a concerted kind of careful analysis of it rather than a kind of, quick and dirty. Yes.
I came in late, so I may have missed it, but have you had any more progress on identifying in those newly found juvenilia paintings, who those people are?
No, I haven't. Do you know?
I heard there was some speculation that one was Ed and Regina, and then someone at the birthday said, oh, definitely not. That's Oliver and Hardy. And so I think there's still a lot of research to be done on those, on who those were. And I think it was actually Frances who was saying some of them. She was saying, oh, that's such and such who stayed in the house, and that's Aunt Catherine or something like that. And so I'd love to get Frances maybe on Zoom or something. Say, how can you what about this?
Yeah.
What about this?
Yeah, absolutely.
I have many questions, but I'll just say this. So Louise was very opinionated and protective. And so I'm trying to say that as nice as I can. Don't laugh at me. I don't mean that in a bad way. I love Louise. Like, she was amazing. But she was so incisive in her deconstruction of criticism towards O'Connor. And so as scholars, we're always trying to analyze O'Connor's writings and the impact of her life and whether that's represented or not in the town and the history of Milledgeville. So if we look at, this house as more of a family home and I'm going to call it the construction of a legacy that was curated, especially from Louise's perspective, how would you see being able to tell that story in a way that can help current and future archivists and family members to really preserve the integrity of the work as written, but also the backstory that happens after that person is gone from us? Because all of us at some point are going to go. I mean, I'm not going to have a story, but some people in this room might have a story that is important enough to preserve. And so how can you see the house as being able to tell a story in a town where so much is hidden, so much is destroyed, and that is at risk of happening here?
Want to take a stab?
So I think one of the really maybe overlooked parts of the house and of the Klein family history is the importance of the Klein family to the city of Milledgeville. I'm not sure how many greats are in front of grandfather, but O'Connor's like maybe great grandfather was the mayor of Milledgeville at a time. And this is, this was at a time where Milledgeville was very much a central part of Georgia politics, of Georgia culture. A lot of the west of Georgia was not very well developed until like the late 1800s. So thinking about, there's a ton of conversation around O'Connor's resistance to Regina's ideal mold of Southern lady, but I don't know that there's been a lot of, adequate attention to Regina's lineage and the kind of pressure that she must have felt as like a legacy family member of, it was, I think it was Klein ancestors who established Sacred Heart Catholic Church, or had at least a role in that. The mill on the Oconee River Greenway, which is now a major danger to kayakers, and that's about it. That was a huge part of their, of the economy, of their identity. And, at the time that O'Connor would have been in town, there was also the only train in the country that stopped at a red light running through the middle of downtown. So there's this really like interesting nexus of all this like political, cultural, racial, religious, economic tension. And my hope is that we can look at the house in its totality, having been built by these like people, also being an example of this rare kind of brickwork, this lace brick design. Having housed a governor briefly, but also then having been this really interesting space of a really almost matriarchal family unit, right? Where there are these women taking in boarders who are often other women as well. And we know Uncle Lewis was there and had a room and was, kind of in and out, but it was really much a house full of women in a time period where, women were not typically left in charge of things. So I'm hoping that as we, kind of tell the story of the house, we can really be in depth, that it's really gives, honor and the representation and respect to the people who were working there, because I don't know that there's much record of this, but I don't think all of those women were cooking all of their own food and cleaning their own toilets. But I don't know who was. I don't know, where are we going to get that information if we don't have, the kind of trust and relationship to get the honest information, which was also a struggle in the Oral History Project. We have young white college students going out to interview folks about when the KKK came to town. And there's always that, with any oral history, that kind of worry that, are they going to be able to be honest 100%? Is there going to be the trust there to say the deepest, darkest, memories or takeaways? So don't know if that sums it up, but it's my hope.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Yeah, because there's so many layers of history. But because it's O'Connor, we received it. And because we are, the designated liberal arts campus in the USG system, we're sort of stewards for the people of Georgia, essentially, with this history. And so I feel like that burden, like, to tell that story right. And all the stories, actually. And it's just because O'Connor became a famous writer that we got that this stuff was saved in the first place. But it also gets to this, weirdness that I've noticed. I moved to Milledgeville in 2010, and I had this weird sense like I'm living in an archive. And it really is like you live in an archive, but there's so many things that are erased. So I mentioned Central State. That was closed down, and it's really like the archives about it are like hard to find. They're shifting around. People just show up on the special collections. I've got a box of stuff. Will you take it? And it's kind of this weird thing, 12,000 inmates were there, right? And where did that story go? And Mab Seegers wrote the book, right? But she was like literally, Mab Seegers wrote a scholarly book about a cultural history of Central State Hospital. She was in residence at Milledgeville. She went to the Georgia archives and found all this stuff. And she was literally handing it to me as she left. Please take care of this, you know, and it's like in my office. I don't know what to do with it. You know what I mean? So there was this disappearing. And then we have this very, you know, palpable archive that was given to us. So I think that, you know, adjudicating that and figuring out, I think the Institute is very interested in it because what we want to do is use the items to tell stories, and stories that are about O'Connor, about her family, but also beyond that, you know, and so being able to focus on her radio, now we can look at, it's on her desk, but what was coming in through the radio. So now we have other histories we can access, right? And so I think that it's an incredible way to funnel history, right? And it is a weird thing because it's almost like we had a presentation at the September conference and some of the audience says, who does that? Who just leaves all their stuff for hundreds of years, you know? And it's like, we might say, yeah, that's weird. And then it's also because of that, she left it. I mean, we have it. Who has all that stuff? Like, you know, just in one place. So I'm really grateful to Louise that she kind of stewarded it as well. And she actually was curating it to some degree, it feels like. But, you know, O'Connor's room, nobody lived in there after she left. Regina's room, nobody lived in there after she left. So, and that in and of itself is a kind of story, you know. The other questions? Yes.
I was wondering if either or both of you would be willing to share your personal favorite spot in Milledgeville.
Personal favorites.
If you have one.
I have my happy places. One is the trail behind, you know, Jess mentioned it at Andalusia Farm. There's a hiking trail I go out there every week and walk, and it goes, there's a couple of bridges across creeks, but I always feel like, and I've gotten lost once off the trail, and that was a happy time too, because I was way back on the property and kind of seeing, you know, there's old farm equipment way out there. There's just like a whole, that's another archaeological project, is that 500 acres and what's all there. So that's, I guess, one of my happy places.
My favorite place in Milledgeville is the river, being on the river. I'm a kayaker, and so because the river is broken up by two dams for Lake Oconee and Lake Sinclair, they filter a lot of sediment out. And so it's actually one of the clearest rivers in Georgia. If you're kayaking, you can often see the bottom, you can see the fish. Alligators that live there have come upon one kayaking before. There's also otters, blue herons, tons of turtles. So, and if you kayak from Milledgeville, you can kayak basically from Milledgeville to Savannah. But if you leave Milledgeville and kayak to Dublin, it's the most undeveloped stretch of river in the state. So you can see a lot of wildlife, and you can actually camp at sandbars along the way. So that's I always recommend people go on the river with a life jacket on, please, safety first. But yeah.
With alligator repellent. I'm just kidding.
Leave them alone and never ever feed them. You'll be fine.
Stay in the middle, you'll be fine.
Yes. Yeah, well, it was funny because he was in the middle. And
Oh,
I
no.
paddled up and didn't realize, and then he was startled and I was startled. And I was like, I'm just gonna let you go where you need to go and then paddle quickly. But yes, there are alligators in Milledgeville. Never ever feed alligators.
Don't forget about the snakes.
Yeah, that's true.
Walkerly Arboretum is a really great walking space, and they've put so much into it. It's got all the native plants from Georgia. So you can really see all the different trees that would grow there. And that's a really beautiful space. Other questions? All right. Well, anyway, make sure to get your handout if you want all the Like this one has all the research information and all
Run
the
out back
links.
here.
You're back there. But also we have other stuff and we're happy to chat if you want to come up. If you're planning a trip, definitely go to visit Milledgeville first because they have a whole O'Connor page. They have all the information that you can book tours, that kind of thing. So thank you for coming. We appreciate it.